Hello everybody, welcome to the final Hearthstone Ingenious Inventions of Dr. Boo mini set reveal video. Apologies, this one's going to be a lot longer than the previous ones. I made a little bit of a boo-boo with my timing. So this is going to cover the 3 days of the 9th, 10th and 11th reveals. I thought there was some on the 12th as well, and I was like, oh, I'll do a video yesterday. And then by the time I realised that, there weren't any on the 12th, there were only 3 cards left to reveal. I thought I'll just put it all into one big video and release it today instead. So strap in and prepare yourself for a lot of cards. First up, the Replicator Innator. 5 mana 5/5 mech, miniaturize, gigantify. After you play a minion with the same attack as this, summon a copy of it. Okay, just again, if you're not aware of the miniaturize, gigantify thing, miniaturize means you'll get a 1 mana 1/1 version of it, and gigantify, the new keyword, means you'll get an 8 mana 8/8 copy of it. So this is 5 mana 5/5 that generates you 2 cards, the 1 mana 1/1 and the 8 mana 8/8. Both have the same effect as the Replicator Innator. This effect, by the way, copying a minion, we've seen this before. Druid has had this a couple of times in the past. Ixlid, which I don't think saw too much play other than to try and initiate some combo decks after you've discounted cards pretty heavily, because this was kind of the problem, with the 5 mana copier guy. You only have like 5 mana left over to play your other minion, so it's kind of limiting by what you could actually play with the Replicator Innator, and I believe that was the problem with Ixlid in the past. Elune, on the other hand, was only 3 mana, but limited you to only copying minions that had 2 or less mana, and that did see a lot of play in aggro decks, That makes perfect sense. How about Replicator Innator, though? What about that? And we're going to have to deal with this in 3 parts, right? We have to deal with the base form, the mini, and the gigantic, because they all have pretty drastically different pools that they will work with. Firstly, the 5/5. Now, it was shown in the reveal video that this could work with Mantle Shaper, and I do think that's probably one of the best things you could get. Mantle Shaper can become a 0 mana 5/5. You play your Replicator Innator when Mantle Shaper is 0 cost. You play it on top of the Replicator Innator, and then suddenly you've played for 5 mana, 15/15 of stats, and generated 2 cards. That's pretty good, right? That's pretty good value. Yeah, it is. It's pretty specific, though. I'm just going to throw that out there. Pretty specific. Obviously, the other thing you try and put this with is Ziliax. There are other ways to generate a 5 attack of Ziliax from what I remember. This is just the one I've shown off here. Potentially, if you could discount one of these mechs heavily, spoilers, Warrior's got an insane mech discounting card later. But if you could discount one of these cards so you could play a bit cheaper, let's just assume you can get a Replicator Innator for 0 mana. Just let's say that Warrior can do that now. And you play your Ziliax on top of it for 4 mana. Suddenly, you have got, on turn 4, 15, 19 of stats, and the Ziliaxes will double in attack. That's really scary, and funnily enough, decks can't normally deal with 7 health and 5 health minions around turn 4. That's pretty obnoxious, right? Also in Warrior Land again, I've kind of spoiled the party for a little later on. Warrior has got mech discounting cards. Fireworker is a mech. You could conceivably play that with your Replicator Innator at a discounted price and get 2 Fireworkers as well, which is important because they have a Death Rattle, which generates some more boom bots. That's pretty good value, right? Even if you get this at 10, it's still 15/15 of stats base with hidden behind it 4/4 of stats that can blow up for 1 to 4 damage. It adds up, right? Then the final 2 cards are shown off here, and I don't think this will ever particularly work. Potentially at 10 mana, you could use your Replicator Innator to play a Doomguard. You'll get a second copy of it. That's 10 attack charging for 10 mana. It's okay, but I think it's too specific for a finisher, and it's a 2-card combo. And it literally discards your hand, so it's pretty useless if you don't do it for the finisher. Malefic Rook is another card that could use this, but if you're not playing Malefic Rook on 3, I think you're not getting the best value of Malefic Rook. It gets so much weaker later and later when your opponent can deal with it. And that's kind of the problem with waiting till turn 8, which is actually pretty soon for the Replicator Innator to go off. There aren't many cheaper minions that have 5 attack, right? At turn 8, your opponent could possibly deal with a board of 15, 17 of stats, right, with Malefic Rook instead. And you do 5 damage to yourself, so I think the middle form is actually pretty hard to abuse too heavily. The 1/1 is the one that kind of interests me the most. There are obviously a lot of one-attack minions in the game. I've pulled out some specific examples. Again, I think Hunter potentially could use this Replicator Innator, so I've thrown some Hunter cards in. On the reveal, they showed off playing the Costume Singer on top of this, so I think they had 7 mana going to their turn. They played the base form, they played Mantle Shaper, then they played the 1-drop, then they played Costume Singer, and you get 2 Costume Singers that draw you 2 secrets at the end of it. That's a lot of stats, a lot of value for your turn, and you still have the 8 mana 8/8 as well for the future. You can also play this with Observer of Mist, get 2 Observer of Mists out for 3 mana, and then you just throw in a minion with more attack than this, and I believe both the Observer of Mist effects will go for the same time, so you get like double the value for it for a single card. So that's pretty good value, right? Another obvious one is Amatus. I think he's the only one-attack Titan. You throw this in some sort of Highlander Paladin deck, probably seeking a little bit more value. You play a Replicator Innator. You play Amatus for 8 mana in total. You have 2 Amatuses. 2 Amatuses is pretty good. You could use one of them to, draw you some cards. You could use one of them to nuke your opponent's board, to buff your board as well. There's a lot of stuff you can do there. And actually, spoilers for the next... The gigantic one. I actually think a Highlander Paladin deck could possibly use this Replicator Innator as well. I think Hunter and Paladin are probably the 2... I'm Warrior, actually, now that I mention it. They're the 3 classes that could probably abuse this card the most. I think the other classes can't really do too much with it. There's also this, and it's kind of more of a watch for the future on this one. Soulburn of Varia is still in the game. You may have forgotten it because there's almost no undead support anymore for Priest. Potentially you could Replicator Innator or Soulburn of Varia. The only thing that's missing from that, I've thrown Murmy on here. There are a lot of one-attack undeads accessible by Priest, but none of them have Rush, or none of them have any fast form of damage, or a way to nuke themselves proactively for you. So you kind of generate this giant board of undead, and then your opponent will just pick off the Soulburn of Varias, and you won't get the big value from, getting Shadow Priest and doing damage to the enemy. But watch this space in the future. If they do release some undead for Priest, especially undead with Rush, and especially ones with one attack, then Varia could actually be a pretty good engine with the Replicator Innator mini. But for right now, you only have Murmy, and I think you've got the Priest card that copies a card from your opponent's deck. It's just not quite enough, right? And it's a little bit too slow, because you have to play the 5-cost Replicator first. So you can't even argue that you could make this Zoo Priest deck. It's a little bit too slow, right? You'd be activating this on turn 6. Now we get to the gigantic form. This is the 8 mana 8/8. Obviously, this is the hardest one to abuse because 8 mana 8/8, it isn't, 2015 anymore. An 8 mana 8/8 is pretty easy to remove from the board for most decks at this point. And a lot of games don't actually go to turn 8 anymore. Therefore, to get the value from the Replicator Innator, you kind of need your additional 2 mana to give you the additional 8 attack minion to copy it on that turn. Otherwise, you're probably not going to ever see the value of this. And it is an 8 mana 8/8. Like, maybe you just don't ever get the effect off on this. If you can get the mini and the middle form, perhaps you just accept that this is going to be an 8 mana 8/8 for you, and you just dump it on a turn where you maybe have nothing else to throw. There is a class that can actually abuse this card pretty nicely, but I don't think it can abuse the other forms quite as nicely, and that's Death Knight. They have Stitch Giant, which can be discounted to 0, and Chain Guardian, which can easily be discounted to 0. Replicator Innator into Chain Guardian is absolutely disgusting. You're getting an additional 8/5 stats, and not only that, it has Reborn, so you're going to get another swing of it, so it's more like 16/6 in stats. That's disgusting. It's truly disgusting. It's just whether or not they can really make use of the mini form and the middle form is my question for Death Knight. The other class of cards, and I'm kind of just using you as the placeholder for the identity of the cards. The Giants obviously are cards that can get discounted to 0. Most of them are 8/8s. Therefore, they're good with Replicator Innator. So conceivably, again, and this is probably more of a nod towards Paladin, which again I think could use all of these forms. Paladin currently runs a Swarm deck, which uses Sea Giants. Maybe you can slot your Replicator Innator in there to, again, swarm for more minions. And if you play Replicator Innator on 8, which is a bit slow for that deck to be fair, it's more of an aggro deck, and you drop like 2 Sea Giants on it, that's all the stats in the world. You're potentially getting, off 1 Sea Giant, you're just getting an additional 8/8, and 2 Sea Giants, you're getting an additional 16/16. Horrible, right? Now we go to another neutral card, the Building Block Golem. 5 mana, 6/3, Rush. Death Rattle summons 3 random 1-cost minions. When I first looked at this, I was like, you know what, this card's kind of insane. If you assume that the random 1-cost minions are 1 mana, right? You could argue this is kind of like a 2 mana, 6/3. That's insane. And we've actually seen cards kind of like this in the past. Mothership was 6 mana, 5/4. And had Rush Death Rattle summon 2 random mechs that cost 3 or less. So you could get 1-drops from the mechs and only get 2 of them. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite work that simply. The lack of a tribe on it or a tribe on the Death Rattles means that the pool of the 1-cost minions is actually pretty dilute. I've shown here as an example like Worgen in Infiltrator. This is probably the most likely thing you're going to get. You're going to get 3 1/1s. Sorry, you're going to get 3 2/1s that have like no effect on them, no tangible benefit to you. Is that actually worth 1 mana in Hearthstone anymore? I'm actually not certain. I think it's worth slightly less than a mana at this point. You have to bear in mind that a lot of the 1-drops do have battle cries on them. You kind of want the battle cry, right? The battle cry is where the value comes in. But this card will not give you the battle cry. Now, it will high roll occasionally. You'll get the, the 1 mana 2/2s, the 1 mana 1/3s, so you get additional stat lines for your book. But I just don't think this is good enough for standard anymore. And it doesn't obviously has no synergy with tribes because it has no tribe on it, unlike Mothership, which had synergies with mechs, and summoning mechs normally did things with other cards. So that's kind of the reason why Mothership saw play. It's going to be an insane card in Arena, though. Like, this is pretty solid Arena card. Alright, now we go to Demon Hunter. They have Return Policy. Discover a friendly Death Rattle card. You played this game, trigger its Death Rattle for 3 mana. Yeah, I was like you. This is 9 lives. This is Demon Hunter 9 lives. The only difference to this card, and the eagle-eyed of you may have noticed this, 9 lives said minion, Return Policy says card. So actually, if you have another card that has a Death Rattle on it, you could discover that card instead. There are a few notable cards I think that could be useful with Return Policy. I think Ballhog is one of the better cards you can get. It's really solid in even the aggro, the mid-rangey, the control decks even. It's just got a really good effect on it. It effectively does 6 damage, gives you 6 lifesteal back as well. Really efficient. Getting another copy of that is fantastic, and it will trigger its effect 1 time, so you could potentially hit a minion at the same time for 3 mana. 3 mana generate a great card, and potentially kill a guy and lifesteal 3. That's good value. Obviously, you need to play the Ballhog first, but it's pretty cheap, so it's reasonable to expect that you'll play that early. A lot of people have mentioned as well CCG, the legendary that sees almost 0 play. It is a lot of value, right? If you copy the card again, and you trigger its Death Rattle, you're potentially looking at it getting... I mean, you play the first one, you get 3 random cards. You get it back, you get another 3, and you trigger it as well, you get another 3. That's 9 Demon Hunter cards. Is that good enough? Kind of a no. It's probably too much value. Anytime I put CCG into any of my Demon Hunter decks, I just can't empty my hand fast enough to get the value from the CCG, so I think it's just too much value. But maybe if you're in one of these insane giga banger games and you're down to like your last cards and you top deck a Return Policy and you've played CCG and you just suddenly get a hand refill again, that might actually be the bee's knees for you. But I think more often than not, you just won't have hand space for this. I alluded to this before. It says Death Rattle card, so you could get an Umpire's Grasp back as well. The problem with this is that normally Umpire's Grasp is played in a deck with Window Shopper and only Window Shopper as the demon. And funnily enough, you can only put 2 Window Shoppers into your deck. So getting back Umpire's Grasp again, kind of pointless. Now, you might say, and maybe this is what will happen, you could open up the demon pool slightly so it's not just Window Shopper, and your Umpire's Grasp is pulling out all these big demons like the Magtheridons of the world, the Rushing Inquisitor guy whose name has completely escaped me, the 8 mana 8/8 that attacks the face if you attack the face as well. It attacks whatever you're attacking. Normally the face, right? Yeah, you could do that, and maybe the big discounts on the demons becomes worth it, and you just run Umpire's Grasp in the deck and Return Policy back to get multiple copies of it. I'll see. Actually, I think I'm going to hold off on that. I think it's going to be too slow. I don't think it's going to be good enough against the aggro decks, but it might be a fun value deck. Also, the final card I've thrown in is Sylvanas. Golden oldie card. Sylvanas, put it into your value Demon Hunter deck, your mid-rangey control deck or something like that. And it dies. Obviously, your opponent can play around Sylvanas by making sure they have no minions on the board when they kill it, or making sure that they copy something that is not particularly good. However, it's much harder to play around 3 mana steal a random guy. They don't know when you're going to play your return policy. Maybe that's good enough, right? 3 mana steal a random guy, it might make Sylvanas worth running. Now, obviously, Sylvanas has to die first, and it's a legendary, so it's only going to be a one-off, but just slot it into your, your deck, and maybe you'll get lucky. Demon Hunter also has Sock Puppet Slither Spear, 1 mana 1/3 Naga. This minion's attack is improved by your heroes. Now, obviously, this is a nod to Vicious Slither Spear, which has seen a lot of play in many classes because it was neutral, but almost exclusively in aggro decks. It's kind of funny that they've kind of given you a nod to this card being like one of the classic cards. It's a pretty recent addition to the game, and it's still in the core set with the nod back to it again. But I think this does. I think it is fair enough because Vicious Slither Spear has said if you're an aggro deck, you've probably tried to put Vicious Slither Spear into your deck. It is so good. A lot of the aggro decks play a lot of cheap spells, if only to generate some more tokens, if only to generate some card draw. If only to generate you some buffs. And this Slither Spear, it goes down on 1. It's hard to remove it because doing 3 damage on turn 1 is pretty hard for most classes. And then suddenly on turn 2, it's attacking you for, 3 damage or something instead. And that adds up. That is pretty painful. Sock Puppet Slither Spear, it's actually pretty similar. It's still really painful. If you whack this down on turn 1, and on turn 2, you have Spirit of the Team up, for example, you're attacking for 3/3 again. That is disgusting. That is a lot of damage. You can also throw on a Parched Desperado if you have like the coin in the synergy to enable the Parched Desperado to go off. And suddenly you're looking at the Sock Puppet having 4 attack instead. It is just the aggro's dream, and Spirit of the Team and Parched Desperado both being run in a window shopper deck, which you would argue is an aggro deck. And I think that deck runs Vicious Slither Spear. They might want to drop that now and run the Sock Puppet Slither Spear instead. It might honestly be better for, at least for classes that don't run too many spells, but do gain a lot of attack. And obviously, this is unique to Demon Hunter, and Demon Hunter is pretty good at gaining attack. It is what their class identity, right? We also have Gibbering Reject, 4 mana 3/3 Demon. After your hero attacks, summon another Gibbering Reject. This continues the long tradition of gibbering minions. We had Feral Gibberer, which was after your minion attacks a hero, you get a copy of it in your hand, and Gibberling, which had Spell Burst. In case you didn't know this, you cast a spell after playing this minion, and the effect would go off. You summon a Gibbering, and then that Gibbering would have Spell Burst, so you play another spell, you get another Gibbering. This actually saw play in a token Druid deck, by the way, the Spell Burst Gibbering. Gibbering Reject, on the other hand, I'm not so certain of it. The obvious card that synergizes with this immediately is Going Down Swinging. It is an 8 mana combo, though, right? And it depends on your opponent's board state. If you're going, though, against an aggro deck and you can live to that point, it is pretty much game over for the aggro deck, right? Imagine you're playing against Hunter, you play your Going Down Swinging with the Gibbering Reject on board, and your Going Down Swinging, like, cleaves through all your opponent's minions. They normally have pretty low health, clears the board up, and then you suddenly have a board full of Gibbering Rejects. Even just use them to trade in future interactions. That is backbreaking for aggro decks. Now, the problem is that, firstly, Going Down Swinging is a legendary card, so there's only one of them in the deck, so getting both Gibbering Reject and Going Down Swinging in your hand at the same time, less likely than you might think. Also, going into 8 mana, most aggro decks, by the time you got to turn 8, have lost, because they don't want to be at that point in the game. You've basically just weathered the storm, right, and you should get more value than them going forwards. Now, you could say that because Gibbering Reject is a demon, it can be discounted with the weapon as well, so potentially you could play this as a 6 mana combo, and I think that's more palatable. But again, at that point you're going, I need to have this one-off in my hand, I also need to have the weapon and to have broke the weapon, and I need to have Gibbering Reject. I don't think it all quite aligns. Also, the other sad thing for this card right now is, obviously, Demon Hunter could always push the button to attack, and for that, you're getting, 5 mana for the 6/6 stat lines. It's good, but it isn't great. It's very arena-like, in my opinion. There aren't many other ways to get Demon Hunter right now to attack another minion. The only other 2 things I can think of is using Ignis and getting Wind Fury, or Rune-Fueled Golem and getting a Wind Fury weapon from the Shaman Paladin dual class card. They're like the 2 exceptions. And it's all just so much setting up that this is going to be too slow. And I think the one good case use of this card, it just won't be viable at that point, because you'll have already won the game or already lost the game. So I don't think Gibbering Reject will see any play. Now we go to Warrior Land, and boy, Warrior has a card coming up. This isn't it, though. This is Standardized Pack. 1 mana, add 5 random taunt minions to your hand. At the end of your turn, you discard them. This is the second pack card we've seen, I think. And it's pretty average, in my opinion. Why? Well, Quality Assurance is in the game right now, which is draw 2 taunt minions from your deck for 1 mana more. And this doesn't see really much play. Even in Taunt Warrior, they don't necessarily play this card, which kind of gives you an idea that the standardized pack is probably not going to be that good. It's also randomized taunt minions, so you don't know what you're going to get. There are some high rolls in the randomized taunt pool. Nerubian Swarm Guard would be pretty big for a taunt warrior deck. They normally have some sort of taunt buffing cards anyway. It's hard to get that off, though, because these are temporary, as a reminder. So maybe you could get a +1/+1 onto it and then play the Nerubian and get, 3 2/4s instead with taunt. That's pretty nice. Deathbring Sourfang I've thrown in here as well as like a reusable taunt minion. You don't super care about losing health as well in that matchup. You can gain armor as well to like mitigate this. It would be pretty nice to buff it as well, but obviously when it comes back to your hand, it would lose those buffs until you buffed it again. Living Horizon is probably the best thing you can get. It already adds 5 cards to your hand. It makes it more likely that Living Horizon will cost 0. I think this is the ultimate high roll for this card. You play your standardized pack, draw 5 cards, Living Horizon becomes a 0-cost minion maybe, or, 1 or 2 mana. You throw it onto the board, and your opponent despairs because they have to get through a 4/6 Taunt Divine Shield. Abyssal Bases similarly could get discounted pretty heavily, especially in Taunt Warrior decks because they often run a weapon. Raden I've thrown under here as well. Potentially you could, at like turn 10, play a Raden as well. If you've played multiple standardized packs and maybe you got a bunch of Swarm Guards, you got the Living Horizons, you got the Abyssal Basis, you put Raden on the board and suddenly he is another board fill for you. Pretty nice, right? And then the final thing, and I've mentioned this for the other packs, and I might not mention it on the next one, you could Gaslight Gatekeeper after playing Standardized Pack to add 5 cards to your deck. Now, Control Warrior classically does enjoy doing stuff like that, or in Control decks in general. Because Control decks want the game to last as long as possible, right? That's basically they're like, we can play until the cows come home. Unfortunately, Control Warrior right now doesn't super care about getting more cards. Normally that matters in the Control v Control matchup, because in that matchup, the greediest person wins. And what is greed in adding 5 random cards to your deck? Even if they're not that good, it's still 5 cards your opponent doesn't have. Control Warrior right now, though, they just play Odin, right? And then try and win the game with Odin. So they don't need to go longer into the game. In fact, if anything, they want to go quicker and become almost like a combo deck instead and get off this big armor gain turn and just one-shot your opponent. So I kind of wish this standardized pack wasn't in Warrior. I know why it is, because Warrior has a taunt package. I kind of wish it was in Priest instead. I think Priest could have done with this value, and it fits a little bit more with their current theme where they don't have this great win condition right now, Control Priest, but they do have a lot of value cards. Anyway, I think this card won't see play. Alright, the best card of the set, Part Scrapper. 2 mana, lose up to 5 armor. Your next mech costs that much less. Unbelievably broken. Prepare to watch this card get nerfed pretty soon. You were fed up with seeing Warrior before. The rumours are that Highlander Warrior is going to get nerfed. Wait till you see Mech Warrior, because this is going to be filthy. Why is it going to be filthy? Well, there's this card, Safety Goggles, which I actually didn't rate too highly before, and it's actually seeing a lot of play now. My original rating of this ended up being wrong. However, the Safety Goggles works so nicely with Part Scrapper. You assume you have no armor, just don't push the button, and you play your Safety Goggles. You play your Part Scrapper. Your Safety Goggles cost 0. That was 0 mana gain 6. That means your Part Scrapper is 2 mana discount your next mech by 5. That's disgusting. That's disgusting mana cheat. And I have some examples here. This requires you to be on turn 3. You actually need 1 more mana for this, but I think these are the 2 most disgusting things you could do. You do your Safety Goggles on turn 3. Don't push the button on 2, because you'll have armor and your opponent will just not hit you in the face. I honestly think they'll have to start doing that if this deck rises to the top. If your opponent pushes button on 2, just don't attack them. Leave them with armor. Until you get into the late game where you can deal with these cards. But anyway, you play your Safety Goggles on 3 for 0 mana. You get 6 armor. You play your Part Scrapper for 2. Discount the next mech by 5. That means Testing Dummy is 1 mana. And you're on turn 3. And your opponent has to deal with a 4/8 taunt mech that deals 8 damage randomly split amongst all enemies. That's disgusting. Actually, completely disgusting. I think that's honestly backbreaking for most decks. You will just automatically win the game doing that. The other thing I've thrown on here is Ziliax. You potentially could put Ziliax at the start of your turn, double this minion's attack. Battlecry, summon a copy of this. For 6 mana. Is that even right? This looks wrong. But anyway, you can get a broken Ziliax at 6 cost. You know what? Let me pause for a second. Let me just check this out. I just checked. It is true. You could get this. So you potentially cheat out on turn 3. 8/12 of stats. That if you do not deal with the 8/12 of stats on turn 3, or maybe 4, you know, depending on when you actually did it, or the turn ordering even, they double in attack, which means on the next turn, they will be in total 16/12 of stats. You just lose, right? We've already seen this before. Rogue had this deck where they put out the elusive, stealthed, double Battlecry Ziliax, and not a lot of decks could deal with that. And actually, a lot of decks couldn't deal with that if they got it super early, even without the elusive taunt nature of the card. And there's other ways you could put this Ziliax into 6 mana range and really break the game. You could also, on turn 2, by the way, just put a Fireworker on the board. Why not throw a Fireworker on the board on turn 2? It's a 5 mana 5/5, which summons, you know, 2/2 of stats that also explode and do additional damage. That is pretty horrible. And then leads you into potentially throwing the weapon out, or that also gives you death rattles. I've not put it on here as well, but the mech copying mech card as well is a 5 mana 5/5 mech. You could also discount that on a turn. Let's say this is on turn 5 instead. And you get it down to 0, and then you play your Fireworker to get your 2 Fireworkers. That's disgusting. Maybe that is the way you see this instead. Maybe you don't go for this super aggro type build. Maybe you go for the more value-orientated play. I think you're going to go for the aggro play, though. Then we also have Safety Expert, another mech. 10 mana 8/8. Rush, Death Rattle, shuffle 3 bombs into your opponent's deck. Now, before you start, you know, peeing and pooping all over the room, these are the old bombs, I believe. They're not the Boom Boss bombs or the TNTs. So this will just be cast when drawn, you take 5 damage. And I say just, it's actually a lot of damage to take. Yeah, obviously the play with this would be to get the Boom Wrench up, and you have the Boom Wrench set to a 3/1, i.e. you swung with it 1 time. You play the Safety Expert, you swing with the Boom Wrench, you shuffle 3 bombs into your opponent's deck, you attack with the Safety Expert. Ideally, it doesn't just instantly die, but maybe it does die, trades out a giant minion, and you shuffle 3 more bombs in your deck, and your opponent then has 30 damage in their deck at some point. So it's almost like an inevitability that you're going to win, minus the classes that can gain armor or health, aka Warrior and Priest. And there are some other exceptions. Death Knight can also get above the 30 threshold. It's also really good with Wreckham and Deckham. Now, this will require you to do something like Chemical Spill to cheat it out, because you don't have the mana otherwise. But if you Chemical Spill Safety Expert, you know, you're happy for it to die eventually, because the bombs are kind of probably what you're really after. And you're still doing 8 damage for 5 mana. Obviously, it doesn't go to the face, but that's still pretty good value, right? But you play a Wreckham and Deckham on top of this, you get 2 8/3s. The 8/3 hits a random enemy, could hit the face, that could be nice 8 damage to the face, then dies and puts 3 bombs into the deck. Then your other Safety Expert dies, puts 3 bombs into the deck. Your Boom Wrench also goes off during all of this, and you're, you know, by a certain point you've put like 9 or 12 bombs in your opponent's deck, and they're crying. Because they don't want to draw cards anymore, which is kind of what the Hearthstone game is about. Whenever you can break the rules of how the game is supposed to be played, and make your opponent not want to play the game that way, like if they don't want to play minions, they don't want to play spells, they don't want to draw cards, normally that becomes a pretty toxic state of game. So I think this is going to be pretty obnoxious, and I think there will be this, and I tried to run this in the past, so if you want to go back and scour my VODs, I did try and make this Boom Warrior deck, I called it, work, where you were trying to use these Death Rattle mechs. I probably would have put Safety Expert in the deck. It would have just got in there over probably the Factory Assembly bot, which didn't really perform too well. Oh, by the way, remember as well that Boom can pull this back as well in the future to shuffle a few more bombs into the deck. Don't forget that. Yeah, I think this could be disgusting. I did make it more aggro-focused. I did eventually drop Recommend Deckhams. I'm not actually sure you will run the Recommend Deckhams with this. I think you're more inclined to run the Chemical Spills instead and cheat out these giant mechs, and also just giant warrior minions in general. Just as an FYI as well, because just to skip back to neutral again, there is a card called Exploding Air also added to the set, 3 mana 2/4, which at the end of the turn shoves a bomb into your opponent's deck, which when drawn explodes for 5 damage. Obviously, this intention was to add this into the bomb warrior deck. I actually don't think this card will see any play in it. I don't think there's any reason to. I don't think you go down the line of super bomb synergy. It's only 2 cards. It's just not enough. I think it's fine just to have the safety expert in the deck. I think that is just more than enough. And you just keep hitting your opponent aggressively, and eventually you hope the bombs just tick you over the edge in other games that otherwise they might have swung the game back into their favour. We have got precedence in the end of turn effects of minions with 4 health. Crystal Merchant from the Bastard Druid was a really good card, but obviously drawing a card I think is worth more than putting a bomb into your opponent's deck, as you tangibly get the card immediately, whereas the bomb may never go off. I'd also point out that Crystal Merchant was a 2 mana card, not 3, so it's easier to deal with a 3 mana 4 health card than a 2 mana 4 health card. And that's kind of indicated by Val Apothecary, which I think is also a better card than Exploding Air. Concoctions were very good in the past, but this card very rarely saw any play, because it was just too easy to remove the 3/4. So you did get 1 Concoction, but it wasn't good enough for you. And I think the same with Exploding Air. You'll get the 1 bomb, but it will just get removed immediately afterwards. Alright, now we're in Shaman Land, and Shaman has cards. Just putting it out there, they have some cards. Wink, wink. Rocket Hopper, 5 mana 10/10 Beast. Rush as well, because, you know, in case you weren't happy with the 10/10 stat line, it also has Rush. Overload 4. Wow. Okay, well, Flame Wreathed Faceless is in shambles right now. He's crying in the corner. He's no longer the big, beefy Overload Shaman boy. It's Rocket Hopper instead. 5 mana 10/10 Rush. 5! That's incredible! I've mentioned a few times... a few times in the past. What is the neutral like stat line that would break a card, for example? So by that I mean you have like these 6 mana, 7/7, 6 mana 8/8s. But in modern Hearthstone, it's pretty easy to remove a single target guy now, for at least a lot of classes. Some classes it's easier than others. For example, Hunter would probably struggle to deal with the giant guy instead, because they'll have to run their swarm of minions into it. But Priest, for example, used to have a 1 mana, basically remove a big guy. And they still have, 4 mana remove a field of big guys. So it was always, what was this critical mass, where a card could be statted very heavily, but have very little effect on it. And by the way, this has an effect. It has Rush on it. But I think a 5 mana 10/10 certainly fits that bill. I think this is such an unbelievable card. And by the way, there is additional advantages to playing the Rocket Hopper. Remember, Overdraft and Thorim Stormlord are still in the game. So conceivably you could play the Rocket Hopper on turn 5. Turn 6, you come up, you have Overload 4. You play the Overdraft and deal 4 damage to a minion and unlock the crystals. So you basically got a 5 mana 10/10 Rush minion for free! By the way, this is a beast as well, so you could shoot it with beast cards. I've not mentioned it on here, but it is. It's got a tribe, which also adds to the value. I'm choking, this card is so disgusting. Thorium, by the way, it isn't quite as nice because you can't play this onto turn 6, because with the 4 Overload, you'll only have 2 mana on turn 6. Unless you have a coin, and there is a reasonable chance that if you're running this Overload deck, you might have some sort of coin generator in there as well. But at the very least, on turn 7, you play the Rocket Hopper on 6, you still get 10/10 of stats, which is disgusting on turn 6. And on 7, you play Thorim, unlocks the Overloaded Crystals, and you draw 4 cards. That's incredible. Actually, just disgusting. By the way, Disciple of Golganeth is also in the game, so if Rocket Hopper gets hit by Golganeth, you could play this on turn 4 instead. You thought, oh, maybe on turn 5 I can deal with the 10/10. What about turn 4? How many decks can deal with Rocket Hopper on turn 4? I can't think of many. There are some, but not that many. Oh boy, this is a huge card. Oh, and by the way, Thunderbringer is still in the game. As in, it was released the set before last. Which summons an elemental and beast from your deck? How about you don't take the Overload? How about you just cheat out a Rocket Hopper? 5 mana 10/10 Rush from Thunderbringer. That is really, really scary. Also, as a side note for scariness, Mismatched Fossils could hit this card. It is a beast. So, conceivably, your Death Knight, or I guess your Hunters that are looking for a bit of value, They could put Mismatched Fossils into the deck, get this as the Beast, get an Undead, and put this stat line on an Undead, and you obviously just wouldn't ever play the Beast after that, because it would never have a stat line worth having Overload 4 on the card. That might honestly be pretty spooky. I'm not sure it's consistent enough to put Mismatched Fossils in your deck, but bear in mind that if you see your opponent play Mismatched Fossils, you might need to have 10/10 removal. Okay, now we tone it down a little bit more again. 5 mana nature spell, Wave of Nostalgia. Transform all minions into random legendary ones from the past. By the way, this all kind of keyword type thing, or this text, is a bit misleading, because there's also a card currently, the actual reward for excavating, which has all minions, and it means all minions in your field and deck and hand. I believe it's been confirmed this only hits things on the board. They really need to say, like, all minions on the board, or all minions everywhere, or something, just to distinguish between the two. I'm sure they'll get onto it eventually. Obviously, this is very similar in a nod back to Stormbringer, which was transform your minions into random legendary minions. It costs 1 more mana, but it only hit your board, right? Now, I will say, hitting your opponent's board with this seems like a bad idea to do, but there are some situations where a minion is just so scary that it's better to roll the random legendary minion from the past. And there are some really bad legendary minions in the past, so I think more often than not that if you get a minion that is pretty spooky, and I'd even go as far to say, like, if you got Chained Guardian on the field which has Reborn, and hadn't made an attack, for example, it'd probably be worth Wave of Nostalgia-ing it. I think you would more often not get a less scary minion than that. I'd also say that, nice thing about Wave of Nostalgia, 5 mana, so Hagatha the Fabled can draw it and cast it. And it's pretty nice to cast it with Hagatha, because the slime will get hit by the Wave of Nostalgia, so you'll get like a free legendary minion. Other cards you're looking for with this are stuff like Pop-Up Book and Feral Spirit, where you can cheat out pretty cheap minions, because it's not like random minions that cost more, it is literally just random legendary, so as long as you have the token on the board, you are fine. And then again, you want this to be used in a board state of asymmetry where you have more minions than your opponent. Can you set that up consistently with Shaman? I'm not entirely certain. I don't think this card's actually going to see that much play. It is a lot of fun, but legendary minions from the past aren't quite all what they're cracked up to be. And the fact that it is symmetric, there will be some situations where, I mean, I did say that sometimes you want to do transform your opponent's minions, and that might actually be the case where this is good. You just use it to transform your opponent's minions instead. But there will be times where they'll hit like an insane legendary for them, and you'll just lose the game and feel really bad about it. So I'm not convinced by this card. But hopefully this will help Hagatha, because I really like the flavour of Hagatha. I like the card, but Shaman just doesn't quite have the cards right now to support it. Okay, now we go back to broken cards in Shaman. Murloc Growthin. Honestly, this might be the strongest minion revealed so far. 1 mana 1/1 Murloc. You know, how's that the strongest, right? Battlecry. Summon a Tiny Fin with Rush and stats equal to this minion. Okay. And then, by the way, it has Gigantify, so you get an 8 mana 8/8 version of this. Now, I just want you to, like, consider this. You play your Murloc Growthin on 1. You're getting 2/2 of stats on turn 1, where 1/1 of it has Rush. That's pretty good on turn 1. That's a good 1-drop minion. Just as a like comparison to this card, like the effect of it, because obviously on Gigantify as well, you're getting for 8 mana 16/16 of stats with 8/8 of it having Rush. Midnight Wolf, which when it was revealed, I thought this is going to be an insane card. It didn't end up proving to be an insane card. That was 6 mana like 12/12 of stats where both had Rush, so not just the 8/8 side of it or half of it. However, Outcast is considerably harder to do than just play the card for Murloc Growthin. The other card I'm looking at is Factory Assembly Bot, which again summons another minion at the end of the turn. But this is a 10 mana card, right? And it's pretty understated for 10 mana. When you bear in mind you get the additional 6/7, obviously it's not that understated then, but yeah, these are like the two comparable cards to this. And Murloc Growthin has a lot more control over it for when you play it. There are also other nice things about this. What if you bounce back the Growthin? You play Murloc Growthin, you get the Tiny Fin, you play your Brewmaster and the Murloc Growthin. By the way, you get the Gigantic Minion as well. And then you have another Murloc Growthin to give you another Gigantic Minion in the future. And it gets 3/3 stat line, which means that the Tiny Fin that's coming from the 1/1 will get 3/3. So you get a 1 mana 6/6. That's really strong. This is actually, like, incredibly strong stat line. The only slight downside to this card is that there's not a lot of hand buff options in Shaman. It'd be better for other classes, like Paladin would just lose it if they could get this card. And spoilers for the future, Paladin actually has a sneaky way where they might be able to get it. Not very reliable, but I'll talk about it. Warrior would also love something like this as well. They do have some hand buff options, although maybe probably not enough for a small Murloc without taunt. Oh, and by the way, this is a battle cry, so you could put Shudder Block onto this. You play your Shudder Block, your next battle cry triggers 3 times, you play your gigantic Murloc growth in, and suddenly you've got, you know, what is it? 32-32 as stat lines, where 24-24 has rush. Yeah, that is beefy, that is scary, that is horrible. You're not going to like dealing with that, so... Shudder Block has an actual minion to target now. Incredible. I honestly, I can't say this enough. Watch this space. This card, I think, is actually the bee's knees. Alright, now we go to Paladin Land. Whack-a-Null. I love the name of this card. I just adore it. The flavor on some of these cards is fantastic. Discover a Paladin weapon from the past. Give it +1/+1. Wow! We can get Sword of the Fallen and Mysterious Blade! Yeah! Just what you want. You want the secret lovers, right? When there's no secrets in Paladin. Okay, I'm being a little bit tongue-in-cheek here. There will be situations where you get Discover a Paladin weapon, and these are two of the options, and you're just going to be like, really? Really? Mr. Hearthstone, really? But there are some pretty good options instead. The two that I think stand out are Valinor, which is just this repeatable value over time. You play it'll be a 6-mana 5/3. It death rattles, it hand buffs the minion in hand, and Paladin has a pretty strong hand buff theme right now. And then when it dies, you get the weapon back again, equipped for you as well. Now, when it re-equips, I assume you get the 4/2 Valinor, not the 5/3. I believe that'll be the way that works. Still, though, you're just going to have this consistent weapon chonking your opponent's face, and when they've finished using it, it's going to bounce into minions in their hand, and it's going to be minions that want to be hand buffed, and they're going to get lifesteal off it. It could actually be truly toxic. It might be a good enough reason to run Whack-a-Null, because there's not that many Paladin weapons from the past. I should have checked what the pool was for it. I'd probably, as a gut feeling, say it's like 12 to 13, so you've probably got like a 25%, maybe slightly less than 25% chance of hitting Valinor. Another good hit would be Underlight Angling Rod, and this is kind of the nod back. You get a random Murloc in your hand. There's actually not that many Murlocs in the game right now, and if you hit a Murloc Growthin with your hand buff Paladin deck, you're just going to win. You're just going to win. It's just so many stat lines. It's disgusting. I want to throw up. But it will happen sometimes. Either way, it's still value. It still gives you minions that go into your hands. Even if it's bad Murlocs, they're still getting hand buffed, right? So I think these are the two exceptional cards you could get with your hand buff Paladin deck. There's then also cards like Vine Cleaver, where it is beneficial to get the additional swing that gives you another 2/2 Silver Hand recruits, or Silver Sword, where you'd get another swing to give your minions +1/+1. Silver Sword obviously is really hard to take advantage of because it is 8 mana. You're basically taking a turn off to play this. Normally your opponent can do a lot of nasty stuff on the turn you take off, and especially with playing a giant weapon right now, because a lot of people are running Rust-Rot Viper. If you play your Silver Sword for 8 and they Rust-Rot Viper it with a 3 mana card, you've basically wasted 5 mana doing nothing. So, and you've lost all tempo in the game, and you're crying. Alright, now we have Holy Glowstick. Spoilers, by the way, I messed up my animations. Holy Glowsticks is a 4 mana holy spell. It has lifesteal, deal 4 damage, costs 1 if you've cast a holy spell this turn. I guess we'll deal with the Void Shard here. If you don't cast a holy spell, it is Void Shard for Priest. Not Priest, for Paladin. And it's holy. That's the only difference. Void Shard sees 0 play. So I'd expect Holy Glowsticks to see 0 play if that was just the text. However, the discount to 1 is actually pretty nice. 1 mana, deal 4 damage, which, by the way, can go face. It isn't just to a minion. It's kind of odd for Paladin to have so many face-targeting spells, because they do have one other, which we'll get to a bit later on. Not a new card, by the way. This is an old card. It's the... I just need to see the card because I can't remember the name. Holy something another? Whatever. It's the one that does... It's like 2 mana, deal 3 damage, Joragard. They have that as well, so kind of watch the space on potential spell damage, spell dealing Paladin decks, because if you could get multiple copies of Holy Glowsticks, they also do enable themselves. Like you could cast a Holy Glowsticks, and your second one would be 1, which then is 5 mana, deal 8. That's pretty nice, and it's lifesteal as well. And obviously any spell damage on top of that would be pretty brutal. You're looking at like chunking your opponent for 10 or more damage. And, you know, a lot of aggro decks do like finishes, and this might just be a good enough finisher to just eke you over the edge. The other card this reminds me of is Dehydrate, which sees 0 Plaguing Shaman. This was a 3 mana deal 4 damage, but it only was to a minion, not just 4 damage flat. Also, the quick draw effect, which makes it cost 1, it's harder to enable than casting a Holy Spell. There's so many Holy Spells right now for Paladin, and there's actually a few Holy Spell synergies. For example, Flickering Lightbot, 3 mana 3/3 mech with Gigantify, costs 1 less for each Holy Spell you've cast this game. That's pretty scary, right? And obviously the Gigantify is an 8 mana 8/8, which again is discounted by 1 for each Holy Spell you've cast this game. So if you play 8 Holy Spells, your Gigantified Flickering Lightbot is a 0 mana 8/8. Basically like a giant stat line. That's pretty spooky, right? And there are a decent number of Holy Spells. Hammer of Wrath was what I was thinking of. It's 3 mana, not 2. That's the other targeted, deal 3 damage. This is only to mention as well that a lot of the Holy Spells have a cycling aspect to it, like Hand of Adal, Hammer of Wrath, Flash of Light. All Holy Spells that draw a card. It's like Holy Spells that replace themselves. So these probably would all be played into this deck with the Flickering Lightbot, just to try and firstly draw into it, and secondly, it's a Holy Spell that might get you another Holy Spell. And that's what you want to do, right? You want to cast Holy Spells. In terms of synergies as well, there is Starlight Groove still in the set. No one really has made a deck revolving around this card. It's a little bit easier to play around, but if you're playing all of these Holy Spells, maybe you put your Starlight Groove in the deck as well, so that your hero has a little bit of extra protection, just to let you survive long enough to get the Flickering Lightbots discounted significantly. Now, I think the best case scenario for Flickering Lightbot is the other part of the card. Everyone looks at the Holy Spells, but no one looks at the tribe. It is a mech. If you play Inventor's Aura on turn 2, or if you coin it on turn 1, it is a Holy Spell that discounts mechs by 1. So that actually takes 2 mana off your Flickering Lightbot. It becomes a 1 mana 3/3. If in a Dream situation, though, you have the Frequency Oscillator as well in your hand, you could potentially play Inventor's Aura, Frequency Oscillator, in which case Flickering Lightbot is a 0 mana 3/3. And for 2 mana in total, it's a 3-card combo. You're getting 5/4 stat lines. If you've used the coin for that and you've done it on turn 1, there's not a lot of decks that can deal with that. That being said, though, it's kind of an unfortunate stat line to some degree, as a lot of classes can do 1 damage, so they can remove the 2 attack from the Frequency Oscillator pretty easily. And then a turn or 2 later, most decks can deal 3 damage, so they can deal with the Flickering Lightbot as well. And I don't think there's enough mech Paladin support to really justify doing this. So I think the Flickering Lightbot won't actually see any play. I don't think the Holy Synergy's there, and I don't think the mech Synergy's there. Fun card, though. I like it. Alright, Rogueland. We have Twisted Pack, the final of the pack cards. 1 mana, add 5 random cards from other classes to your hand. At the end of your turn, you discard them. Now, obviously, this is for stuff like Tess, this is for stuff like Velrock. It's a pretty efficient way to get a card from another class. One of the nice things as well, and one of the issues with Tess when you try to do this card from other class deck, or whenever you've tried to do this from the past, often when you get a permanent card from another class, and it's a bad card, it just gets stuck in your hand, right? If you get like Twisting Nether, you don't want to put Twisting Nether into your Tess, because Tess will die when you play Tess. And normally you want to bounce Tess back 800 times, because there are no other ways to abuse the card from other classes, realistically. I know Velrock is somewhat of an abuse of it, but you only need 1 of them, and then the Velrock is set. He doesn't need more than that. Tess, you just want to get this insane value turn. You want to bounce Tess back and play it again for an insane value, and eventually just break your opponent's spine. But basically for the reason I mentioned, there's just not enough synergies with cards from other classes. This Twisted Pack just won't see any play. I just don't believe it will see any play. It needs something like Contraband Stash added to the game again to just help Tess along a little bit. Because also in some games, you won't draw Tess. Like, it's a one-of legendary that could get Dirty Ratted as well. And if it gets Dirty Ratted, you lose. So, yeah. Now, I say all of this. I'm aware that the Mining Rogue deck does occasionally run Tess. Maybe they would run Twisted Pack. But I'm still not convinced they would run the Twisted Pack. I think it is too much. Just an FYI as well, Sonya Water Dancer could play this as a 1 mana card to get a 0 copy of it. And there is a world where you play Sonya Water Dancer, you play the Twisted Pack, you play the 0 cost Twisted Pack, and then you shuffle your entire hand into your deck, and you've added like potentially 9 cards to your deck or something like that. Most realistically, you won't do that, because do you ever have hand space for 10 cards? Probably not, right? But yeah, you could add a bunch of cards to your deck. I think it's just a pipe dream. I think of all the classes that could use this type of thing, you normally want it in the slower control decks. I think it would have been really, like, usable in Priest. I just don't think it's usable in Rogue at all. Like, it's just nothing. That being said, though, I guess you could say it's fuel for your shuffle your hand into your deck synergy Rogue deck that just doesn't work, and it discounts the card by 8 mana and discards the giant by 20 mana eventually. It has some high turns, but it's just not consistent enough. I don't think Twisted Pack will help it that much. When I see this seeing some play, though, and I don't normally do this, I'm not a big Wild player, but as soon as I saw this card, I was like, hang on a minute. I remember Wild Paw Null and the issues around that card. If you play Twisted Pack in Wild and you have a Wild Paw Null in your deck, Wild Paw Null becomes 0 mana. And this was a problem back when it was in Standard of discounting it to 0 via turning your hero into a different class. And this meant that the Wild Paw Null treated you not as the Rogue class, so when you drew the Rogue cards, then it would discount the Wild Paw Null, which is why it got reworded to non-Rogue cards rather than other class cards to play around that. Anyway, you can get it back down to 0 mana. Also, the Bizarre Burglary, which is the quest line associated with playing cards from other classes, again in Wild. You just instantly complete one cycle if it was Twisted Pack, so it's going to see more play in Wild than Standard, I think. And actually, it might be a bit of a menace in Wild, so just watch this space if you're a Wild lover. Okay, Dust Bunny, the best flavor text of a card released, I think. 3 mana 3/2 Beast, Battlecry and Death Rattle. Add a random piece of junk to your hand. A coin, a rock, a banana, or a knife. Now, they tweeted out, they put on the Discord channel for the reveals this image to show you a banana, a rock, a coin. I think they've shown the wrong thing for the weapon now. I'm pretty certain a knife is a 1 mana 1/1 weapon. Don't quote me on this one. Tell me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I don't think you get the 1/2 dagger. I'm pretty certain it's a 1 mana 1/1 weapon. Cool. Fun, right? Rogue has had these cards in the past with Battlecry and Death Rattle, like Apothecary Hellbrim, which added poisons to your hand instead, which were cheap cards as well. The best uses of these types of things are normally for your activations to the combo decks. For Hellbrim as well, it was for poisons that were applied to your weapon to go for Kingsbane Rogue decks. Obviously, that's not a thing anymore. Nor do any of these cards help you. Unfortunately, this card is really bad. I love the synergy of it, or the flavor of it. There's not enough good combo cards right now, and we're actually about to see a good combo card, fully enough, but there's just not enough to run the Dust Bunny. Yeah, it's nice to have a rock, yeah, it's nice to get a coin, a banana is fine, but more often than not, these are cards that they're just not quite good enough, and the Dust Bunny stat line is pretty understated. Like, you've basically lost 2 stats from what I would say is a typical 3 mana 3/4 card that does something pretty good. Yeah, the cards just aren't worth it. They're for combo cards, and there's just not a combo synergy. So, Dust Bunny, I love you. I adore the art. I love the flavor. I just don't think you're going to see any play. Alright, here's the combo card I was alluding to. Dubious Purchase. 4 mana, draw 3 cards. Combo, destroy a random enemy minion. This card's kind of insane when you think about it. It's basically Nourish tied to Deadly Shot. Obviously, the Nourish where it says draw 3 cards. And even without the combo, Nourish was 5 mana, draw 3 cards. This is 4 mana, draw 3 cards, so you're already better than Nourish. And a lot of times, Druids did use Nourish just to draw 3 cards, right? That was a reasonable outcome of Nourish. Now, it did have a spell Skull Nature, so it could get discounted via Nature Lovers, and that often did happen as well. The Destroy a Random Enemy Minion part is basically Deadly Shot, which is a 3 mana card, so you could almost argue that Dubious Purchase, if you get the combo off, it's kind of like an 8 mana card packaged together in a 4 mana box. That's really efficient. Obviously, combo requires you to play another card, which will have a mana cost, but being Rogue, that mana cost could be 0. So there is definitely worlds where, like, you do Preparation, for example, into Dubious Purchase, and that's suddenly 2 mana, draw 3 cards, destroy a random enemy minion. That's really good. Is it good enough, though, to elevate Rogue out of the doldrums? Perhaps. I don't run this deck anymore, or at least I tried to when the set very first got released and it didn't work. I believe there are some people still running this Sonya Water Dance into playing hundreds of deadly poisons to make a giant weapon deck. I believe that deck, being a combo deck, probably wants to draw through the deck pretty quickly, and drawing through the deck whilst destroying random enemy minions is probably pretty favourable for not a control deck, a combo deck. So I can see Dubious Purchase seeing play in that deck. Will it elevate it back up? I don't think so, if only because the APM you need to play that deck is insane, because the animations take too long. So it's really hard to actually get this Sonya combo off and one-shot your opponent. And it's also impossible to do it into a warrior that has like 50 health, because you just don't have the time to do it. Or a Death Knight that has like 50 health. So, it's a good card. Just watch this space again. If Rogue gets some good cards, I can see Dubious Purchase going into that deck. Just a very solid Rogue card. Alright, now we get to Death Knight Land. 4 mana double Blood Rune. Helm of Humiliation. It's a shadow spell. Give a minion -5/-5. Give a minion in your hand +5/+5. Oh, okay, obviously this is for hand buff Death Knight. These are the 3 cards you're probably going to look at hitting with it. Nerubian Swarm Guard, Shambling Zombie Tank, and No Muncher. There are others as well, like you might want to hit the Hollow Hound as well to give you a big lifesteal. That's normally run in that token deck as well. It is pretty good, right? You're effectively killing a guy for 4 mana. You're giving a minion in your hand +5/+5. The only thing I'll say about this card, there's a few things that make me think it might not actually see play in the hand buff deck, sorry. The first big one is his double blood rune requirement. Now, there is a hand buff deck that runs single unholy double blood. However, I think the better version of that deck runs a rainbow archetype now, so that they can run stuff like Reska. I think Reska is the big thing. They also run the weapon that freezes as well. This means that you couldn't run Reska and the weapon that freezes into this deck, but you might not want to, spoilers for the next 2 cards. So it's kind of like balancing out which one of these decks is going to be better after the mini set. The single unholy double blood, or the rainbow type deck which doesn't have the climatic necrotic explosion in it. The other downside to this is it's a single card. Currently the hand buff cards they use are stuff like Amateur Puppeteer or the lesser Spinal Spellstone. They target all undead in your hands. So Amateur Puppeteer, even though it only gives +2/+2, might hit 5 or 6 minions. You also try to draw as many cards as you can to hit as many buff targets as possible. And therefore, you're hitting more minions with the 2/2, so you'll probably get more value from the hand buff than the helm is going to give you from its single target buff. But perhaps I don't play that deck much. I've played it like 1 time. I didn't feel like I was desperate for single target removal, so I'm not entirely certain it'll see any play, but it'll certainly get a bit of testing. Alright, this weapon is a weapon. It's the weapon. Weapon. Foam Render, 1 Unholy Rune, 5 mana, 5/1 weapon. Whenever your hero attacks, spend 3 corpses to gain 1 durability. It is an infinity weapon with 5 attack. Cool. In a class that likes to spend corpses and can generate a lot of corpses. Immediately as soon as I saw this, I was like, oh, it's Mograine. It's just Mograine again. Mograine gave you this inevitable, you're taking damage on every single turn. It was 3 damage. Foam Render, for some decks, when you play it, you'll have like 20 or 30 corpses. It's basically inevitable you're going to take 5 damage a turn every single turn, which is unbelievably disgusting. Also, bear in mind, being a weapon, it could get hit by Runes of Darkness, so you could turn it into a 6/2 instead. Obviously, the durability doesn't matter as much, but the additional attack is pretty frightening, to be fair. And as I kind of alluded to, Single Unholy Rune means it can go into a Rainbow Death Knight deck that runs Climatic Necrotic Explosion. Now, one of the downsides of Climatic Necrotic Explosion is trying to balance the generating corpses with the spending corpses. And they typically are pretty good at generating corpses, but they typically don't spend corpses quite as freely. Foam Render is unbelievably efficiently spending corpses. Like, every single turn you're spending 3 corpses. Consistently. 3 corpses, 3 corpses, 3 corpses, 3 corpses. And there's not a lot your opponent can do about it. Basically, the options are to play Rustrot Viper. You're probably going to run 2 of these cards, though, so they're going to have to run 2 Vipers. Or they play Giant Taunt Minion, so you're really reluctant to hit it with the Foam Render. That being said, the Climatic Necrotic Explosion Rainbow Death has access to single target removal via, generating Poisonous Undead with Charge, and that type of deal, or the Poisonous Undead with Rush. So, I think this is going to go straight into the Rainbow Death Knight deck. The Rainbow Death Knight deck was probably around tier 2 before the mini set. And one of the reasons why it wasn't super hot right now is that it gets hard destroyed by, or at least as far as I'm aware, it gets destroyed by the Highlander Warrior deck. Because it wants to go into the late game, and the Highlander Warrior deck will eventually play Boom Boss and destroy your Climatic Necrotic Explosion, which means you kind of eventually will lose the game. You just don't outvalue them. With the rumours, the murmurings that the Highlander deck is going to get nerfed, and pretty heavily nerfed, this might open the window for this deck just to rise from the tombs and Yeah, honestly, I could see the Rainbow Death Knight deck becoming a tier 1 deck again. Also, I think the hand buff deck is going to be pretty solid, especially when the Warrior deck drops off a little bit. I think Death Knights will rise towards the top. Foam Render, really insane card. Now, I know a lot of people are saying as well, Battle Pickaxe, this was an infinite weapon for Warrior, and this sees almost zero play. So, you're all overreacting, stop crying about Foam Render. But I'll tell you what I said when Battle Pickaxe was revealed. Taunt minions, which is what, gives you the additional durability on Battle Pickaxe, typically not aggressively statted, right? They're typically pretty defensively statted. Also, they're typically pretty expensive taunt minions. Now, this means that the Battle Pickaxe, sure, it is a recurring weapon, but it's not particularly aggressive. It's more of a slow-burning control weapon. That's fine. Like, an infinity weapon for a control deck is pretty good. I will say about Foam Render as well. This could also go into a really aggressive Unholy, triple Unholy deck. It could go into a control deck as well. And I think the Rainbow is more in the control aspect. So you might not do the 5 to face every turn. Sometimes you'll do 5 to remove a guy. And you'll be happy enough with that. Battle Pickaxe didn't really have, though, the option to be aggro. It really was more of a defensive card. You were typically spending more mana, and I would probably say you spend more mana getting taunt minions than you do getting 3 corpses. There's a lot of cards that generate you a lot of corpses for the mana cost, so I think it's just easier to enable Foam Render than it is to enable Battle Pickaxe, and I think Foam Render is better aggressive than Battle Pickaxe is. So I think they're not comparable. I think Foam Render will be a lot better in Death Knight than Battle Pickaxe was in Warrior. The final Death Knight card is Toy Snatching Geist. 3 mana, 2/1 undead. Again, single unholy, Gigantify. Battlecry, discover an undead, reduce its cost by this minion's attack. Obviously, this is good for your hand buffing cards like the Helm of Humiliation, which was just revealed. It is also an undead, so it'll get hit by Lesser Spinal Spellstone and Amateur Puppeteer. And maybe you will run that in your hand buff deck. Maybe that's another minion you try to slot into the package. Because discovering an undead and reducing its cost by this minion's attack means that, at the very basis of this card, it's a 3 mana 2/1 with a 2 mana discount on your next undead. Assuming you haven't somehow had it reduced in attack in your hand. And then when you get the Gigantify version, it's 8 mana 8/8 that discounts your next undead by 8. Oh, sorry, the discovered undead by 8. That is potentially really frightening because there's actually not that many undeads beyond 8 mana cost, right? There are some, but even those ones get discounted in some way. There are some obvious cards here to grab. Rescuer is the primo, uno, numero, insane card to grab. You're probably going to have a lot of minions die in this deck. Which means that Rescuer is going to be pretty cheap anyway. If you get your Toy Snatching Geist, maybe that just takes it down just enough to get it to 0, where otherwise maybe it would be at like 5 or 6 mana instead. Also, what you could do, and it's kind of alludes to what I mentioned before, some hand buff decks run a rainbow rune requirement just so they can basically put Rescuer in it. They also put the weapon in it, but I think it's mainly for Rescuer to steal a guy. You could potentially now get Rescuer in your single Unholy double Blood Rune deck with the Toy Snatching Geist. I don't know how consistent it is. There's actually a lot of undead in the game right now, especially in Death Knight, but including the neutral cards as well. So I don't know if it's going to be consistent enough, but maybe you err towards that side, knowing that you could possibly generate Rescuer by other means. You can also get something like Soul Stealer. Maybe you'll need like a board clear at some point. Maybe your opponent like clears your board, plays a really aggressive board for themselves, and you're like, oh my god, the Soul Stealer that I basically almost like a tech card, just in case the worst happens. I couldn't put it in my Rainbow deck because it was double blood requirement. Now I've got one. Fantastic. You can also just grab something like Mishmash Mosher as well. This is another big undead from the neutral side of things. It doesn't normally get ran in hand buff decks, but if you did hand buff this guy, it could become a board clear as well for you. So I'm not entirely certain the Toy Snatching guys will actually make this hand buff deck. I think it's a little bit too slow for it. Most of the undead that you want, you play in the deck. You don't really need the discount, and you don't get a huge value of the discount. There's not like the biggest undead is Rescuer, but obviously it can discount itself eventually by playing minions. I think the next biggest ones are the Soul Stealers and the Mishmash Moshers of the world, the 8 mana cards. And do you need the discount? I'm not entirely certain. Versus just the more aggressive options or the the copying multiple times the minion instead. Maybe you slot out the Hollow Hound for it, but I'm not convinced. I think that list is pretty tight right now, and I don't see these two cards actually making it into the list. The final class we're going to deal with are the Warlocks. They have Domino Effect, 3 mana spell, deal 2 damage to a minion, repeat to the left or right, dealing 1 more damage each time. Now, I have to explain this card because it's not explained very well, because everyone's like, okay, so this is 3 mana board clear, right? Because the text doesn't make sense. And I feel kind of for the Hearthstone team, it's really hard to write the text in some of these cards. The way this card works, though, is if you play the Domino Effect on the leftmost card, so assume they have 4 minions on the board and you put it on the leftmost card, this card will do 2 damage to the left minion. It will then move to the right and do 3. Then it'll move again, 4. It'll move 1 final time, do 5. Then there's no more minion to the right of it, so it'll stop. It won't bounce back the other way. Similarly, if you put it in the middle of like 5 minions, it would go left or right, 50-50 chance, do 2, then 3, then 4, and then it would stop. It wouldn't bounce back the other way. It's not really explained well on here. It does read like it should board clear, but it doesn't work. It's kind of like rolling Fireball. And I also believe the Domino Effect is interrupted by locations or dormant minions, so there are decks that can kind of like play around this. The only thing I really, got to say about this card is Warlock has a lot of removal right now, especially board clears. They are probably the most anti-aggro class out there right now. Warrior would give them a run for their money, but Warlock is probably the second most. They have a lot of early game removal. I think if you're a Hunter deck right now, and especially after the mini set comes out, I think Warlock decks, control Warlock decks, are going to be your nightmare. The Domino Effect's pretty good into that deck. 3 mana potential board clear, especially into a class that has a lot of tokens that have low health. Very nasty, especially when Table Flip could also be at that kind of range. Defile could also do a number on that deck. So there's a lot of stuff here to suggest that if the deck goes, the meta goes more aggro, and even right now with Highlander Warrior, which you could argue is like a control deck, being in the meta, aggro is still reigning supreme right now. The Hunter and the Paladin decks are the top 2 decks by win percentages, I believe. I believe that's not changed since last week. And, you know, maybe you'll want to put in these cards to deal with this swarming board of minions, and I think Warlock could do that pretty nicely. Alright, we also have Infernal! Obviously a nod back to you playing Lord J of the Burning L. And if you push the button, which gives you a 6/6 Infernal, he just shouts, Infernal! And it was a bit of a joke in the community, you know, that he just shouts it. This is a 4 mana 6/6 Demon. Of course, it had to be a 6/6 Demon because it's an Infernal. It has Taunt as well. And then Battle Cry, set your hero's remaining health to 15. I kind of like the flavor in this. This obviously is very similar to what Jiraxxus used to do, which was set your health to 15 when you played the hero. And then your button became Generate Infernals. Also, this effect is actually pretty similar to Alexstrasza, but obviously it doesn't hit your opponent's face. It hits only your face as well. Sorry, it only hits your face, not as well. Just your face. Otherwise, it would be broken. That being said, and people are going like, oh yeah, 4 mana, deal 15 damage to yourself. What a great card. Don't poo-poo this too much. I believe this works. Don't shout at me in the comments if it doesn't, though. If you play Malefic Rook on 3, and this is kind of like what you would do in your Pain Warlock deck, which has actually dropped off a little bit. If on 4 you play Infernal and set your remaining health to 15, I believe on 5 you would be able to play Molten Giant for 5 mana. Because Molten Giant's text isn't worded correctly. They still haven't fixed this. I believe it's effectively the effective effect that it does is it's actually for like every health below 30 you are discounting this by a mana. So that is a pretty nasty curve if this does work. You Malefic Rook, which again, you don't care about hitting yourself for 5 anymore because you're about to set yourself to 15 anyway, who cares? You play your Infernal, which also gives you Taunt, so if you're going into an aggro matchup, it allows you to not trade to your opponent's minions. You can just play aggressively still. Your opponent's minions will have to trade into the Infernal, and they're probably going to die mainly, because a 4 mana 6/6 is really overstated. And as I said, it just overlooks his Malefic Rook health. Who cares about hitting yourself for 5? You're going to hit yourself for 15 anyway. And then you play the Molten Giant on top of that. That is really, really, really disgusting as a curve. Now, it does require you to have these 3 cards in hand at 3, 4, and 5. It will happen some games, though, and you will just zoo your opponent down with these big minions. So, I don't think this is going to work. I think it's going to be, like, at the very best, like a tier 4 deck, but There's definitely some games you'll lose to something like this, and you'll feel pretty sad. Unless you're playing deck, in which case you'll feel like money. The final card of the mini set. Mass Production. 1 mana, Warlock spell. Draw 2 cards. Deal 3 damage to your hero. Shuffle 2 copies of this into your deck. This card is kind of weird and insane. Obviously, the intention of this card is to allow you to draw through your deck as quickly as possible, because you're drawing the 2 cards, you're taking the 3 damage, that's fine. Drawing 2 cards for 1 mana is really good value anyway. The 3 damage is whatever. It's Warlock, you can accept dealing damage to your face anyway. That is your archetype as well. You can deal with taking damage to your hero. There are cards to play around that. The shuffling 2 cards into your deck, though, is really spooky, because if you play another one of these on top of the first one, because obviously you can't mass produce into a mass produce that's generated from the original mass produce, you potentially could just start drawing through your deck. Like, imagine on turn 5, you play 5 of these, and it could happen. It's not that likely, but it could happen. You draw 10 cards by turn 5. You are taking like 15 damage in the process, but it's kind of insane card draw. The unfortunate thing about this is I don't think you can abuse it that much, although there is one deck that I think will run it, and I'm actually a bit concerned about it. One of the decks that I think could use it is the Wheel Warlock deck. Now, Warlock has fallen off a big cliff recently. And actually, I think a big part of this was because they can't just throw Reno in the deck anymore. They have to be a Reno deck at the start of the game to use Reno. And Wheel Warlock does not want to be a Reno deck. They wanted to use their 2 copies of Twisting and so on and so forth. So basically, you lost this 1 additional removal. Also, the Wheel of Death now gives you effectively 1 additional turn to deal with it. Both those things combined just meant that the Warlock couldn't survive long enough for the Wheel to tick down. Either way, though, Mass Production, drawing a lot of cards. Wheel of Death wants you to draw. It's kind of weird. It's almost a combo deck, the Wheel deck. Draw as many of your cards that can deal with your opponent's board as possible, or like can protect you for as long as possible. And as soon as you feel like you've hit that critical mass, you drop the Wheel and destroy the rest of your deck. This is good for both, Thanatom and Wheel of Death. Even if you don't have the Wheel on board, you're discounting Thanatom as you're playing the Mass Productions. Well, I say that. You're not, are you? Because you're shuffling 2 copies back into the deck again, so this is actually card neutral. Except for the fact you're playing the card, so your hand is losing a card. No, your hand is gaining a card. I'm very confused. It's card neutral with your deck anyway. So actually, you're not discounting Thanatom, but either way, I still think it would be in this Thanatom Wheel of Warlock deck would be pretty nice. Just to draw as many of your saviors, or what you want to call them, as possible. And then you just destroy the rest of the Mass Production. Because eventually, as well, you're going to have just your deck full of Mass Production. And you don't really want your deck just full of Mass Production, right? Other deck that I've pointed out for this potentially working, you could go into the Fatigue Warlock deck. Now, Fatigue Warlock wants to draw through their deck as quickly as possible. They want to go into Fatigue, eventually play a card that protects you from taking Fatigue damage, and then your opponent just takes the Fatigue instead. Or you'll play a card that, deals damage equal to your Fatigue, and you'll just drop your Fatigue so low that you one-shot your opponent. Conceivably, Mass Production could do this. This could really, crank up the Fatigue somewhat. Although I guess you're shuffling 2 copies of your deck of the first one again. I'm having the sudden realization on this last card that it might be really shit. And maybe the option that I was going to say was a meme option is the best option. So, hang on a minute. On Fatigue, then you draw 2, you'll do the 2 Fatigue damage, you'll put 2 back into the deck, you'd play another one, you would draw 2 cards. Yeah, you'd stop taking Fatigue damage, right? You would just start putting more and more copies of cards into your deck, which were all bad cards and did nothing. So it actually puts off Fatigue. Alright, scratch this is all dumb. The best example I can think of then is Archvillain Refarm in Standard, at least. Which I thought was a bit of a meme option. You could fill up your deck with these Mass Productions, draw all the other cards that are important, and eventually you just use Archvillain Refarm to turn them into other cards and just prolong the game even longer. Pretty nice if you're some sort of control-based deck. I mentioned that control decks typically like to add more cards to their deck to go longer, and this is a way of doing it. It's a very memey way of doing it, but it could be fun. I know a lot of people are worried about this card in Wild again. I don't normally talk about Wild, but the Demon Seed has been an ongoing issue in Standard when it was in Standard, and then in Wild when it's come to Wild. It's a really toxic card that eventually causes your opponent to die without really any interaction with your opponent. You're just playing your own game, which is destroy every card in your deck and take 30 damage over, 3 cycles of the Demon Seed. A lot of people have been saying, like, the mass production, it does 3 damage to your hero for the Demon Seed. It draws you 2 more cards. It gets you through the deck a little bit faster. But actually, I don't think it is getting through the deck faster. I think actually maybe they're overreacting a little bit to the Demon Seed. Not that I like the Demon Seed, but I don't know if this is going to do too much harm to it. Anyway, that's all the cards for the mini set. Let me know of any cards you think that are going to be superb. Any cards that... I was going to say any cards that would be bad, but that might be a too long a list. Just think of any decks that are going to be like, or cards that are going to be superb, and any decks that you think will suddenly rise from maybe the rough and come into the fairway instead, and the light will shine upon it, and maybe it will be a good deck, because I'm actually not that certain there's going to be many new archetypes. The one that immediately appeals to me, I think Secret Hunter might actually become a thing now. I think we have hit the critical mass for secrets to be a thing. I don't think it'll be a tier 1 deck, but I think it might be like a tier 2 deck instead. And in terms of cards, I'm a little bit concerned about Dorian. I'm not going to lie. Is it going to be the best one? No, I actually think the Sharpened 1/1 Murloc might actually be the best card, but who knows? I'll do a ratings video as well on these cards in the next coming days. Before Tuesday, though, because that's when the mini set reveals. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Bye!